Your next 7 Caillou challenge is called First Class Function Factory. Write a function called factory that takes a number as its parameter and returns another function. The returned function should take an array of numbers as its parameter and return an array of those numbers multiplied by the number that was passed into the first function. In the example below, 5 is the number passed into the first function, so it returns a function that takes an array and multiplies all elements in it by 5. Look at the example below. So they're going to call the factory method with the input 5 like they described. You see that stubbed out over here, that method. And for example, if you had an array of the values 1, 2, and 3, when you call 5s, remember the factory returned a function, and so then they just set up an array to work with, and when you use that function on the input set, it's going to transform it by multiplying each element by that value, 5 in this case. So 1, 2, and 3 map to 5, 10, and 15. 1 times 5 is 5, 2 times 5 is 10, 3 times 5 is 15. I hope that's clear. Go ahead and pause the video and try your best at this one. I know we haven't done a lot with Func yet, so my tip for starting is to go to the docs page and look up Func and use the examples there to your benefit. All right, I'll get into it since you've had a chance to pause and try. So like I said, go over to the docs page. Func, I think I've showed this before, they got these ridiculous number of these, but the idea is that for each one, you notice how the last parameter is always called t-result. That's what the function would return, and so you lead up with however many parameters you have. If you have 0 parameters, then you can use this func with just t-result that has your return type listed as a generic value. Similarly, if you have 1 argument, you can use this one, which applies to our challenge, so we'll focus on this. It takes 1 function parameter and it returns something. In our case, that was we take an integer array, and it so happens that t-result is also an integer array. We're also returning that, the only difference being the values get modified, right? They're multiplied by that input value. So you can see that this func thing encapsulates a method that has 1 parameter. We talked about that, the t. There's just 1, you know, there's ones with t1, t2, etc. If you look at their documentation, it'll say 2 parameters, but this one has 1 parameter and it returns a value of the type specified by t-result. So, okay, yeah, pretty general, and let's look at the example, see this thing in action. So, you see this delegate they set up here. They're using strings, func string string, give it a name like you'd name any other variable. And then they're using this lambda notation, right? We've used this before, right? It's just shorthand for writing a function, right? So you don't have to write out a whole function. You can do it in place in this really concise syntax, which is convenient once you're comfortable with it. So I think we can leverage that in our challenge and sort of manipulate it to our types. So let's try something like this. Let's say func int array, that's what it wants, right? Call it func or whatever you want. And then equals, right? The parameter first. So I'll call it, it's an input array. This is a variable name, right? We know this, the parameter list. Name it whatever you want. And then what do you do with that input array? Well, you can take the input array, select, right? We've used select in the past to transform collections, right? It processes each element and does something with it. So in this case, I'll say n times x. And you know what? I don't like x. This could be way more expressive. Let's do this. Multiplier or even mult would be good. And then we know we've used select before. It returns an I enumerable. So we've got to convert that back to an array, right? The func said it takes an integer array and it returns an integer array. So you got to hold true, and that's what we've also specified here because we copied. And if you don't do that, you're going to get some kind of an error. So good, that's our delegate. And then once you make that, I mean, you can return func. And I did this in 2 lines so you could kind of see it. Also, I'll mention again too, you should be able to do something like var maybe. But if you want to just do this all in place, you don't need to do it in 2 separate steps. I was just trying to be clear so you could see how I got there. It's a little more intimidating if you just come right out with this. So I thought you'd see how I got there, and then hopefully this isn't intimidating. So, oh, we're gonna get dinged already. I can tell we use select. We know that's a link method. Gotta bring that in. Let's try now. So yeah, green. Hit that attempt. Looking good. So yeah, not much to it, but I know it can be confusing and uncomfortable and weird when you first deal with these things. Just to show you there's nothing magical about this, let's do private int array. Let's just explicitly type out a method, a function, int array, that matches the delegate type here, right? And we'll say input array, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and so we can just kind of make this method, and then with the idea being that I want to show you that you could also just say return multiplier, right? The little weird thing here I'm going to do is how to get the multiplier value into the method, because I can't add it as a parameter, right? Because then I'd have two parameters now, and that wouldn't match the signature of this thing. It's only supposed to have 1 parameter. So what I'll do to make this work, I'll just make a private variable, private int multiplier. And we can go multiplier equals the multiplier that was passed in up here, right? And then in our method, we can access the member variable. We'll do that. So, array, we'll make a result, right? And it's going to be the same size as the array we're working with, right? It's going to have the same number of elements. They just all get multiplied. We could say for int I, or you could use a link statement here if you'd rather do that. I'll write it out this way. But yeah, if you're comfortable, you do that shorthand. And then we could say result equals array I, the original value, times that multiplier value we stored in our class variable there, right? And then you could say return result, and this should be the same thing, right? We've just, instead of that nice shorthand that we did in 1 line to finish this challenge, see how that it saved us all this extra stuff. But let's make sure this works. Yeah, I've got return multiplier, right? Let's give this a go. All right, an object reference, oh sure, that's fair. So notice that their function's static, so they're able to work with the class name. See how they just invoke factory from the class name, function factory. This is good information. That's the class name, and since it's a static function, they didn't have to create an instance of function factory to use this method. It's accessible just by using the class's name. You can access it that way, where again, static is like turning off object-oriented programming, right? It makes it more like the method is just sort of housed in this logical unit. So that's why you access it that way. If it weren't static, you would have to create a new function factory object and then call methods on that instantiated object. But since they're doing it this way, and since what we're doing isn't really about object-oriented programming either, we'll just make our stuff static. So that should be fine. Line 19 cannot convert from, oh yeah, so we don't want to set the result equal to this product, right? We want to set the element inside of the result array, whichever one we're on. Definitely makes sense. Okay, and attempt, make sure we're still clear. Okay, so yeah, and this is just, you didn't have to do this. I just wanted to show you that there's nothing magic about that sort of, that lambda syntax, you know what I mean? It's just, it's a really nice shorthand. And this way may be more comfortable when you're new and you can use it, that's fine. But when you code all the time, it's nice to be able to avoid all the extra typing. So I like the other one much better. I'm going to go back to my first solution and submit that. Don't need any of this. Yep, don't need system link. That should be good. And then, yeah, one other thing I thought, just to get you thinking, I found this good Stack Overflow article where someone was asking, you know, about Func. What is it? How, when is it used? You know, because when you're new, you don't leverage the benefits of it. You're like, you know, why are these people being overly generic and making all this extra syntax? That's extra stuff to keep track of. But you will come to appreciate it in time. And I think this top answer gave a nice example for illustrating why you might want to use it. In essence, they describe it as a placeholder that you can sort of swap different functions in and out of. So you could change the behavior that way on the fly, which is really nice. And it's nice that, as an example, he uses enumerable select, which we've used a number of times and you should be somewhat familiar with. And it, in fact, takes this same func that we dealt with where it has one parameter and its return type. And you'll notice how he leverages it to generate a collection of names with this hypothetical person object that isn't defined here, but it's not important. Just imagine a person has a name field and an age field and many other fields. And so they can make this collection of names, they can make this collection of ages, all with the same underlying logic, right? It's still people select, people select. And his point is, or her point is, I didn't see what the name was on it, but without this, you're sort of looking at making two different methods to kind of do more or less the same thing. So, and you can appreciate that even more as the amount of data increases. So yeah, feel free to read this over if you'd like. I think it gives a nice little explanation of what may convince you that Func is nice and useful, and hopefully you can start leveraging that power too. I'll go back and submit. They're going to make me attempt again, which is fine. And then, oh, int array does not contain indefinite. Yeah, because I went one too far. I didn't mean to remove system link. That's fair. Good, now I can spit. Yeah, so yeah, remember with this lambda, it's just your parameter list. If it's just one parameter, you don't even have to enclose it in parentheses. But if you had multiple, you would. And then just think of the arrow as like setting up your enclosing braces of your method, and then just drop your method logic in. Make sure you return the right type. Nothing to it. then yeah, go ahead and look through these other ones all you like. Looks pretty similar, but you never know, it might be something to learn in there. Otherwise, hit me up with your questions or we will keep rolling. Thanks for watching.